This winter, Investigation with Dr. T returns for a new season called Our Partners, Building Bridges, Delivering Justice. We're going to spotlight our extraordinary partners. These are professionals and agencies who keep our communities safe and shape the future of justice. At NSU's School of Criminal Justice, learning doesn't stop at textbooks. Our students learn from real professionals in the field. These are leaders who are doing the work. They're driving innovation and they're guiding the next generation into meaningful, lifelong careers. So my guests are going to include veterans who help veterans, local and federal law enforcement leaders, police academy trainers, public defenders and state attorneys, mental health and specialty court judges, United Way of Broward County practitioners, and forensic technology experts. This season, each episode is going to offer authentic conversations, real-world insights, and a front-row look at the careers that shape justice in our communities. Join me Thursday evenings, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard, starting January 8th on the Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel. We're going to spotlight the power of our partnerships, the strength of community, and the career-ready education that sets NSU apart. And my guest tonight is Chief Assistant Public Defender Melinda Blostein. And I did not ask her before we started, am I saying that correctly?
Perfect. Yes. Hi, Dr. Telesco. How are you?
I am. Great. Thank you. I'm so excited that you're here, that we're doing another show together. And so I want to just welcome everybody to another episode of Investigation with Dr. T. I'm your host, Dr. Grace Telesco, Director of the School of Criminal Justice at Nova Southeastern University and an Associate Professor. And each week on this program, we explore the people and the partnerships and the perspectives that shape the justice system, from law enforcement to the courts, from policy to practice. Our goal is to bring thoughtful conversation every week, deepening our understanding of how justice is actually carried out in our communities. And so tonight's episode is Voices of the Defense, and joining us is Miss Melinda Blostein, the Chief Assistant Public Defender for the Specialty Courts Division with the Broward County Public Defender's Office. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She's dedicated her career to public service and criminal defense with particular expertise in problem-solving courts, including mental health courts, drug courts, veterans courts, and other diversion-focused programs. And in her leadership role within the Specialty Courts Division, she works collaboratively with judges, prosecutors, treatment providers, and community partners to develop solutions that prioritize rehabilitation, accountability, and long-term public safety. Her work reflects an important evolution in criminal justice, one that recognizes that many individuals who enter the system struggle with mental illness, with substance use disorders, with trauma, and other complex social challenges that traditional court practices and processes alone may not address. So today we're going to talk about the role of the public defender and the philosophy behind specialty courts and how defense advocacy helps ensure that justice remains both fair and humane. Ms. Blostein, welcome again to Investigation with Dr. T. And there's something that's not in your bio, and that is that you're an alum.
Yes, yeah, I went to Nova Law School. Well, at the time it was Nova Law. Now it's Nova Southeastern. Sorry, I'm a little older. And I loved it. I get to go back now and either see students that are interning. They've had inviting me to some of their presentations or doing judging at the law school. So it's nice to see how it's evolved.
Yeah, that's great. And I said something before we started in our pre-production time together that I want to say out loud to everybody. And that is a big thank you to you, because no matter how many times I've called you, emailed you, like sometimes stalked you, I'm sorry, about internships and getting tours going and field experiences for our students, or asking you about coming on the show. You're always so generous and gracious to us. And it's not lost on us that you have a very, 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 very high profile, busy schedule, and you don't have to do any of this stuff. So we thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
You are so welcome. I thank you for having me. And we talked a little before. I was an intern at the public defender's office in law school, and that's really the reason I became a public defender. So I feel very strongly that we should work with interns. So I welcome when we have your students to request that. I think it's a really important thing that we don't do enough when we're thinking of our career, what we're going to do. I always tell people, come see what it's like, kick the tires, and you're like, this is not for me, or you love it. So I think it's
Right.
really important.
Yeah. And we're going to be having Judge Porth on down the road. We had Judge Wren on also. And so, we talked a little bit about the specialty courts, a little bit in mental health specifically. So, if you can, let's just start off kind of general, right? The role of the public defender. So, for viewers who may not fully understand what is the role of the public defender, could you explain like the mission and why defense representation is such a critical pillar of our American justice system?
It's such a great thing that I'm on today because yesterday was the anniversary of this case called Gideon. We get laws like two ways. The legislature passes them, or we have case law that the courts have interpreted. So this gentleman was convicted of robbery, and he takes up to the Supreme Court of the United States. He hand writes out like, a brief, but an argument to the Supreme Court, and basically says he should have had a lawyer. And that was the case that started it. So yesterday was the anniversary of that. And the reason why it's so important is because the government is very powerful, right? And we want to know that they're always going to do the right thing. But we're all best, and the system is best when we all do our job because that's the way this system was created. So it needs to be an adversary checks and balances. If not, you don't know one bad person could really just spoil the whole batch, right? So we have public defenders who are appointed to people who are indigent and cannot afford to hire a private attorney. And we have a little over 100 public defenders in Broward County. And I've been there for 30 years. So I've kind of been everywhere in
Wow.
the office at this point. Not really in the homicide division. I had a couple homicide cases, but not anything. I mean, they're very serious, but not the death penalty cases. So it's really important that we make sure we're, investigating the cases, taking depositions, talking to our clients to get their side. Sometimes, we think in TV shows, there's all this deep investigation done on every single case, and that's just simply not the case, especially if you're indigent, you're maybe not from this country. We protect everyone's rights. Like we don't pick our clients. We don't go, oh, this case kind of stinks. I don't want it. We get everyone. So the court appoints us when they find that someone is indigent, and we take on that representation.
And so you can't just say, I can't afford an attorney.
Right.
You can't just say that, right? You have to go through certain process and an application. I would imagine that you submit an application with proof of income, correct?
Right. It's an affidavit. So it's an application that you sign saying you're telling the truth. But there's actually someone at the clerk's office that is a like verifies it. So they'll look at like property websites and they've seen before that someone owns a house. If you own a house, and unless it's like pretty all the way mortgaged, you're not going to qualify for a public defender. You really have to meet a pretty hefty or pretty substantial indigency status. So it's not
Yeah.
just you don't want to hire an attorney.
And then like kind of a follow-up to the role of the public defender question is more like, a day in the life of. So like what is a typical public defender attorney face any given day? And the resources that they may have or may not have, caseload, all of that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when you start in the public defender's office right out of law school, we have a really great training program in our office. So you do spend the time between taking the bar and getting your bar results, which is about 2 months, doing a training program, and then you shadow attorneys part of the day as well. But when you start, usually your mornings are filled with just court, and you'll have anywhere from 100 to 200 cases. That doesn't necessarily mean clients, but around 100 clients. And they're usually misdemeanors or juveniles. So that's where we start. We have trainers and we have different things that we've put into place to help support new lawyers. When I started, I was just given like 230 cases and they were like, have fun. And I was in the
Wow.
domestic violence unit. So it was just me and 230 cases. And I had interned, luckily, and I had a great attorney that I worked with, but that was all the training we had. And there wasn't a lot of support. So that has changed, which is really great. Our elected public defender is Gordon Weeks, and he felt that a good, strong training program was really important and not to just throw. I mean, we were fine and but I'm sure I can't even know all the mistakes I made. If I looked back then, I would just probably be mortified. So we have investigators, but it's very hard. There's only so many hours in the day. In our mental health court, for instance, each of my attorneys that I work with have about 200 cases. And that usually means they have somewhere between 60 and 80 clients in custody in the jail. And so we really want them to be seen at a minimum of every 30 days. And that would be like a full-time job. So I'm going tomorrow to the jail. I help them. We work as a team really well to try to make sure that everyone has time to go to the jail. Because like I said, we have court every single day. And then they would just be going, on the weekends to the jail. And we want to have a good work-life balance. So it's tough though. There's just a large number of clients. And like I said, we can't say no. Anyone the court appoints to us, we do
Right.
represent.
Is there a reason why in the beginning it's just misdemeanors and juveniles? Because the felony case is more serious, more
Exactly.
sentencing possibilities and consequences. So if you drop the ball, it's like, okay, maybe it could be repaired, but in a felony case, right out of law school, it's kind of problematic.
Absolutely. And even in the juvenile division, we have more senior attorneys that handle some of the more serious cases with juveniles, and they'll usually take the younger attorneys with them or work with them on those cases. So they are getting experience, but we do try to start in misdemeanor or juvenile because those charges aren't as serious. They're not looking at as much time. And like you said, they can get experience with the jury, they can get experience, questioning police officers, taking depositions when the stakes aren't as high.
Yeah. So like our justice system, like some people, some folks may not have a lot of hope around our justice system and they say it's completely broken. Well, it might it everything always needs improvement. Everything always needs redesigning and redeveloping and reimagining for sure. And we always want to look at ourselves and look at the evidence to support if we're doing a good job or not, to assess that we're doing something right. But isn't it true that, and this is like still under the umbrella of the role of the public defender,
Mhm.
generally speaking, that there's sort of the affluent system, the affluent criminal justice system, uh, and the treatment, which is for the wealthy. And then there's those who are poor on the other side of the spectrum. And then everybody else falls in the middle. But it's the Ford Escort criminal justice system versus the, you know, Jaguar or Ferrari or Lamborghini. Do you think that's true?
I wish it wasn't true, and I would really like to say that, oh, no, it's not. I don't think
Mhm.
it's because of the quality of the lawyering. I think it's simply that, a private attorney, first of all, can just take as many cases as they need to support themselves, right? And they can take cases that they may see as more in their wheelhouse. You might be very strong at something. Or just, somewhere that they think, oh, it's in this judge. Like they'll literally just take cases going, oh, I know this judge. I can, get away with X, Y, not get away. I can maneuver through this courtroom much better than if I took it in front of a different judge. So they get to be more selective. But it's to me, it's not the lawyering that does it. I think it's just the workload
The
that
workload
we have just so many
and
cases.
the compensation and the resources, right? So if your billable hour is I don't even know what an attorney, a private attorney charges, but like
Right,
$475 an hour or maybe 500 an hour, I don't know,
right,
but with that money that's going into the firm and going into the coffers, you can pay for like 10 investigators or 5 investigators or whatever it is. And so the public defender's office is really, and I said this before we started, that they're there because they want to help people. And it's truly it's a public service that they're doing. And we don't really pay our public servants as well as we would pay private attorneys in private practice.
right.
That's the truth.
And an interesting thing happened last year with paying. It was the first year since I've been a public defender. Again, it's been 96 I started, so it's been 30 years. It's the first year that the state attorneys got raises that were higher and not the same as us, not in parity. And It had never happened since I'd been here, so it was just a weird thing to say that I forget the number amount, but let's say they got 5,000 and we got 3,000. Um, so that's like just tough to take too, because you're also telling our lawyers you are not as good. And then we also have to compete with them, right? If you don't really know what you want to do and you get out of school and you're like, oh, they kind of both sound good, and you're not feeling one way very strongly about one or the other, or you're just not sure, if at one point one office is paying $5,000 more, you know, when you're coming out with loans and all that other stuff, you're like, okay, well, I'll go there,
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
and
Yep.
both offices have pretty high turnover just because of the nature of the salary as well. So,
But not you, but not you. That 30 years. I mean,
I
that's
know I've been
somebody
very lucky. I don't
who
know.
loves what they do. Tell us what keeps you there.
It's funny. I asked my group that I work, like my team that works with me, I asked them to say their why, like, why do you do this? And I told them after they did it, and I didn't make them write their name, but I was like, I'm going to read them out loud. If you don't want me to read it out loud, you don't have to, but you don't have to put your name on it. You don't have to like say who it is. And I want them to do it next year. We did it at the beginning, not the beginning. We did it like a couple, we're going to do it in a couple months. And so when I first started, I just wanted to come and get experience. I interned and I was like, I'll go there. I don't have to be in class because I'm interning. I can go and do trials. That'll be fun and make me more marketable. So I went and I originally stayed because I just loved trying cases. I thought it was the greatest thing. It's really fun. It actually is really fun. It's scary, but makes you think on your feet. You have to be well prepared. I love to argue. So I just thought those were great things. As I progressed through my career, I went and worked in juvenile, and I started really seeing some of the collaboration, of what collaboration can do in a community, and then working in the juvenile system and being involved in some of our community organizations that helped our juveniles. So I started kind of shifting to um, wanting, and not that I didn't ever want to help people, but really my focus being, what can we do different? How can we do this different? And looking at people who are either juveniles or adults suffering from a mental health diagnosis or a substance use disorder, how can we do something different? And we had started, Judge Lerner, who is on, started the first county that misdemeanor mental health court. We now have and have had for a while a felony mental health court that has it really expanded to include many things. And we have a veterans court and a drug court. So that's where I am now, and I'm trying to work more with communities, community partners to strengthen our supports for people that have those different things going on so that they can be successful and then community safe.
Yes, yes. And that's a great segue into the next question, which is all about the problem solving courts and the specialty court division. And what, if anything, can you help us understand about these various courts, their various objectives and purpose, and the populations that you serve?
So we have, and I hope I'm not missing, we have three that all have misdemeanors and felonies. Like some of them are separated out because there's just so many, and some are all together. So our veterans court, our mental health court, and our drug court all can handle someone who has a felony charge or a misdemeanor. They all focus and come with the idea that if we provide someone with treatment and support, that they will be successful and that it's less expensive, believe it or not, than jail. And that once we do that and we support them and give them the tools that they need, they aren't going to recidivate. Recidivate, I'm saying it right.
Yes.
So we have a lot of different ways you can go into these courts. One of the newer exciting ones that we have in Broward County is we do have a new misdemeanor mental health court judge who we were able to get him to partner with the county and with our what we call managing entity, but whatever privatized DCF. And we were able to convince them to fund a misdemeanor mental health diversion. So if someone comes into jail, they are identified as having a serious mental illness, either by their attorney or a lot of times the jail. And the jail will send the referral over to the provider and to the state attorney. And then we kind of all set this person on the docket with the judge and discuss if we think this would be a good person, if they're interested in treatment. And if they do treatment for 6 months, their case is dismissed. So it's a great option. And it really does take someone who maybe he doesn't have, and it's people who don't have, like, it's not for prolific offenders and things like that. It's someone who may have, I think it's two prior misdemeanors and up to two prior felonies, but no violent charges. If there's a victim involved, so a theft, a battery, or anything like that, the victim has to consent. Um, and it's been successful. It's brand new. It's about 4 months old that we've been doing this. So we have 12 people participating right now.
That's great. So, like, I think that some people are pretty familiar with the mental health court
Right.
and what happens there is, so if someone's Baker acted, or Marchman Act. Can you speak about that, the Marchman Act? And this is kind of like it's mental health, but it's substance abuse
Right.
specific,
So
right?
we, as a public defender's office, also represent anyone who has been Baker acted. So I'll just talk about that for 1 minute so I can kind of distinguish from the Marchman Act.
Yes,
A Baker
please.
Act is when it's like, think of going to the emergency room. You break your arm, it's pretty bad. You go to the emergency room, they're going to patch you all up and be like, okay, but you need to go see the orthopedist on Monday. Or they're going to say, this is really bad. You need emergency surgery. We're admitting you to the hospital. So for a Baker Act, someone comes in, they're in crisis. They assess them at the hospital and they do say, like, okay, on Monday, you need to go to Henderson, it's a community partner.
Right.
Um, or they're like, you need to stay. You need to stay here for a little while. And that's what we actually, when they file that petition, that's called a Baker Act petition. So for Marchman Act, it's not usual. So then that petition for Baker Act, sorry, can happen by the police just running into someone, someone calling and saying this person's not doing well, and them calling. We have a Baker Act unit that goes out to the scene. They're social workers. They're really nice. And or it can be someone filing paperwork with the court, a petition. Um, with a Marchman Act, almost all of them are filed by someone who knows and loves this person and knows that they have a chronic substance use disorder. So they have to go to the court. So that's someone who needs to have some type of resources and knowledge of how to work that court system. Even though they've made it kind of user friendly, you still have to know it exists, right? Then you have to get to the court. You have to be able to file that paperwork. That's going to be enough to make a judge say, okay, we're going to have a hearing. That paperwork gets served on the person. So the person has noticed that, hey, you have to come to court. And then the court decides, and there's like a rotating list of providers right there in the courts that will, if the judge is saying you're going to be Marchman acted, they'll have them go for an assessment for substance use disorder.
And what's the level of proof that would be required? What's that litmus test
So
for
we
a
don't do
Marchman Act?
them. We don't do Marchman acts. Like, so we don't defend people who are being Marchman acted. But the level of proof is a preponderance. There's no teeth behind the law. That's kind of the most important thing, and I think frustrating thing for families, because if the person doesn't want to do treatment, and this is a person who's not criminally justice involved at all, usually,
This is
same for a
somebody
big
like,
crowd.
so let's say somebody who's a meth user, and they're a chronic relapser, and they've tried 12-step programs and they've gone to treatment, but it's this never ending cycle,
Right.
and that's not only disastrous for the person, but it's disastrous for the family to watch this, and oftentimes then there's crime that's involved, right? So in order, the ways and means to feed the addiction will sometimes blow back on the family
Or
because
they're where they're not
there's
supposed to be, like let's say they're not even stealing from their family. They're just, at an abandoned house because that's where everyone decided that, hey, we can go there. There's no one there. We can, do drugs there. They're still going to be picked up and arrested for burglary of a dwelling if the police catch them.
right. But that
So,
family member, let's say that mother who's elderly, right, and maybe is getting scammed by the son or the daughter, and it's all because of drugs. It's all because of addiction, and so they go to the court. And what is it that they would have to prove? Like what is the evidence that they would have to bring to the court? Uh, would it mandate the person to go into treatment, or
so it
or
mandates them first for an assessment by
okay,
a professional provider. So that can be like our Broward Addiction Recovery, which is called BARC. That's for people who don't have any insurance.
yes,
But they have a rotating group of people there, of providers that will then schedule them for an assessment.
yeah,
But that doesn't like take the person and put them in there, you know?
right,
And a lot of times, so the family has to come in and prove that they know they're using substances. So it can't just be we suspect, they're acting erratic. We think they are. They have to say, we saw, they told us, we found it, we saw it on their phone, there was text that, things that are, proof. The laws are a little bit more lax, but they're still there. Most people don't have attorneys on any side for Marchman Acts. It's usually just loved ones coming in. There are some attorneys that do practice that law. Most of those attorneys represent the families to try to get those
I see.
people into
Yes.
treatment. But if the
Okay.
person doesn't go to treatment, there's just not a lot the court can do because you think, oh, well, they could go to jail. Well, sometimes the last thing you want is this person to go to jail and then, which is not a good environment and very costly, right?
Hmm.
And then they meet people who are maybe doing more serious drugs and have more access to drugs. They are doing other crimes and, and maybe that they're detoxing. And so even the jail does have a detox unit, but having seen it, which whoever goes on your jail tour that you guys are going on, they're going to see it. It's awful. This is
Hmm.
not where you would want a loved one to go and be if they were detoxing from drugs.
Right.
They basically wear a blanket that's Velcroed and they're just sitting there, around a table. Usually they're just kind of all hunched over.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so they have to prove that, and then they will order them into treatment.
So the substance abuse court, the drug court, right?
Mhm.
I know that there's just been so much evidence to support that it works, that it really works. The drug court, the whole system, and the way it is, and um, the motivation that's there. And when someone actually graduates from drug court, it's a big deal. And there's a lot of success stories from the drug court. Right? What you any like anecdotes or testimonies that you want to share with us?
As a young attorney, I actually had a client that went over to drug court, and I really didn't know much about it. I wasn't really involved in it. And I was lucky enough that he invited me to his graduation. So I got to go to the graduation. And after that, I actually went to graduations. When I would know about them, I didn't always know because I wasn't in there. But just to like see people succeed, because I got to be honest, it's such a great thing to be in a treatment court and see people who struggled succeed. And he's still doing well. And because in the criminal court, all you really see are the failures. So the criminal court can put people on probation or order them into treatment, but you don't see the successes because it just kind of happens behind the scenes. So as a young public defender, as a young state attorney, even as a young judge, you just might feel like no one makes it. Like no one's successful. No one can, complete probation because anyone that's been successful, it just happens behind the scenes. Like we don't really see them.
Yeah.
So it was a great thing to go to graduation. And then later I served on a board with someone who later shared with me on that same board that they had graduated our drug court and has a great job. And like when he found out what I was doing, and so just approached me and has subsequently become a speaker at the
Yeah.
drug court
Yeah.
graduation.
That's
So
amazing. That's awesome. And one more court that people may not understand what it is about, the Veterans Court. Can you give us a little bit of an explanation and description about like who goes there? What is it usually for? Are there any kind of like going over into other categories? So if you're a veteran, you might be suffering from very serious PTSD, let's say, and so this is why you're got involved in a fight, and then you're not able to control your rage and the irritability, which is a symptom of PTSD. And then you might be self-medicating with alcohol or drugs, and so there's this like,
right.
it's kind of like dovetailing and going in some of the other categories. But can you tell us a little bit more about the Veterans Court?
Yeah, so the Veterans Court is the judge in there is Judge Merrigan. He's actually a three-star general, so and a veteran. I mean, obviously a veteran, but
Wow.
so it's great that he's there. And when he's not there, there's another judge who's actually the misdemeanor mental health court judge, who's I don't know what rank he is. I'm terrible. I'm gonna have to find out. But he's a veteran, so he will cover when he's not there. And I think it really lends a lot to the legitimacy of our court that we
Yes.
have a veteran, sorry, on the bench. And the state attorney in our division that does veterans court is also a veteran. The public defender is not.
Right.
So we have a few veterans in our office, but that public defender is not a veteran. But what they do is they have someone who's been in service for their country and they have a charge. There are some like very serious charges that are excluded, and they can go in two ways. One is they go in and do 18 months of treatment and their charge is dropped. And the other way is, let's say they have a more serious charge and it doesn't really qualify for the one that's we call diversion to get your case dropped. You can go in on probation with conditions of treatment. And if you complete the probation, then the probation's over. So that would still be on your record, but you might have been looking at prison and instead they negotiate like treatment and probation and it's very closely monitored. That's the other thing about all these courts. Unlike a regular criminal court, you're on probation and you're just on your own. You see a probation officer once a month. Sometimes it's not even once a month anymore, but so you see a probation officer once a month, you have to stay out of trouble, all that stuff. And then with our courts, the treatment courts, you're going to court, sometimes on Zoom. We use Zoom a lot now. And that way you're kind of being accountable. And they show in the drug court, veterans court, and mental health court that that's really a best practice for everybody else to see too, because they see consequences. So we have like graduated consequences. If you violate, you don't just go to jail. It might be more treatment. It might be adding AA or NA, either just adding it in general or having you go more times a week, or maybe going to residential treatment versus outpatient.
So I'm assuming there's a lot of substance use disorder
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
And they all,
All
the courts, you said it perfectly. They kind of all can have overlap. Could have a veteran that might work better in mental health court, but may work better in drug court. So it's just kind of figuring out where we think they're going to get the most support.
And I think that this next question, which is, the human side of justice, and I think that that's like really sums up the problem solving courts, especially specialty courts division. It is the human side of justice. And many individuals entering these courts, they're dealing with, we've mentioned mental illness, addiction, trauma. And by the way, if you're suffering with mental illness or addiction, trauma is also in there somehow. It's not just like trauma is by itself. From your perspective as a public defender, how does recognizing these underlying issues change the way justice should be approached?
One, I think the criminal justice system is always the last one to do any of these things or realize how trauma um, affects your mental health, or the fact that you use substances or any of those things. I feel like we're just always the last to catch up. I mean, childhood trauma, has been known about for years, and really still it's kind of not really addressed in the criminal justice system. And it really would only be addressed by like mitigation. So having, all the information together to say why someone should maybe qualify for one of these courtrooms and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, Identifying it is such a big deal. And when I started, there was about 25% of the jail that we knew had a serious mental illness identified, or the jail, was obvious that they were very mentally ill. Now it's closer to 55% have been identified with a serious mental illness, not just a mental illness. And we know that those numbers are underreported, so someone who the jail's not a treatment place. They're not going in and assessing everyone. And I know they passed the Tristan Murphy Act, but they're really not going and assessing people and, doing a full workup like you might have if you had a lot of money and you could go see a psychiatrist, Um, they're, triage, right? And they're all about managing people. And so if a person is quiet and their mental illness is very inside and not like aggressive or screaming or yelling or outward, manifesting, they can go under the radar. So knowing it, and we do a lot of training in our office. I do with also with some of our community partners and some of the psychologists that are court appointed do trainings where we can help people identify mental illnesses and kind of use more common sense. We're not looking like the doctor definition. We just want someone to be able to say, this seems wrong. Let's send them to a doctor so that we can assess like what we're seeing. We may not know exactly what it is, but we can know that something's not quite right, right? Our communication is not very clear. There's a lot of paranoia. There's things that just don't seem normal. So, and I mean normal in like the defense situation where you have a regular person. Like, well, if I tell people sometimes if the first question when you go see someone in the jail isn't how am I getting out of jail, that's a red flag for mental health to me, because I know there's this myth that people who are homeless like want to be in the jail. Really, they don't, because most of them are very mentally, not many of them are very mentally ill. And then one of the things they want to do is isolate from other people. And the jail is the exact opposite of that, because even if you're in a cell by yourself, you're like in a very small cell and the person's right next to you and they're screaming and they're yelling and they don't turn the lights off. And it's just not conducive to someone with mental health. Um, so I think that people who want to stay in jail myth is very, very limited, maybe in a cold snap, but I still think that they
Right.
mostly would like to just be by themselves and,
Right.
be alone.
Some of the things that I've heard from some women, from the inmates in Lowell prison. I go into Lowell, and I also go to the Alachua County Jail. I used to go to the Broward County Jail, and as a volunteer. But one of the things that I hear is for those who are addicts is that they sort of welcome getting arrested, in that it becomes it's a break from the jungle, because getting the drugs isn't an easy thing. It's there's a lot of degradation. There's a lot of quid pro quo that's happening, especially females and female addicts. And so I've heard them share, like that. Well, I'm kind of like grateful that I got arrested so that I have like this month off to think about what's next. But then the problem is that as they get closer and closer to release, they start toying with the idea that, well, maybe I could just use successfully this time. And that's where I think the consequences come. And yeah,
So
it's really
I
rough.
I have a question.
No, go ahead.
When you're seeing them and they're sharing with you that they were like relieved to be here, are they in a treatment? Like there's some treatment in the jail. So there's a couple of short-term programs that they have in the jail. Are they in more of a
SAP,
treatment?
like
Okay.
the substance abuse
Yeah,
program, ordinarily,
right.
but some not. I mean, like Broward County has a very strong substance abuse program in Bull Rhine, let's say, and
Hmm.
I think Conti as well. But here in Alachua, not so much. It's there really isn't anything, and they do have like volunteers come in, and that's great. So some of the programs that they offer, the women take advantage of it. But like everything, if you don't want to change, and you're not seeing, like I see it in them. I see that they're vampires, they're ghosts of people, and they think they look okay, and it's not. You're not okay. But if you don't want to change, and the pain hasn't gotten great enough, and the consequences haven't gotten great enough, then you're not going to want to do something about your addiction.
Right.
And there is no cure for it, but it is treatable, and we can arrest it, but you have to want it. So you must face that. Is it a little frustrating?
I think saying that they're like a vampire of themselves, I was actually thinking like this seeking behavior and the I'm gonna do fine this time, I'm gonna do really well, and I know I'm not gonna get in trouble again. I have to say that I have not ever heard anyone say to me, I'm gonna get in trouble again.
No, but you can hear it,
So I've
it.
never had anyone say to me like, hey, so they're offering you probation, and I'm like, it's really not a good idea because you keep violating your probation, and they're like, no, I'm gonna do it this time. I've never heard anyone say, I'm definitely gonna violate my probation.
Yeah, but what I have
I mean,
heard
I've had people
is,
say I can't make probation. They should say that, and
yeah,
they'd
yeah.
rather have like a jail sentence. But
But like they start toying with, well, I'm not going to not drink anymore.
right,
I mean,
if I just
like
have like
I'm just going to
one,
do a little bit of weed, just a
right,
little bit, and so then when they're in that frame of mind, and they have like a few weeks before they're released, I know that this is a relapse that has already happened. It
right.
is, you don't even have to wait for it to happen. It's happening.
And one of the things that treatment court knows, and like you said, there's just a ton of evidence about treatment court at this point. It really starts with drug court because they're the most funded and most researched. So, if you have the best program, right? It could be the best program in custody or anywhere. It could be the program in Montana that's beautiful and does every single treatment module that's out there, and it's 60 days and it's amazing. If you go back to where you were without without much support, right? So let's say we're not going to say no support, but without much support, you are going to be back where you were.
100%.
There's
And a
just
lot of them are going back to husbands, partners. In fact, in some cases, their pimp, right?
in some
Who they
cases their parents are
some cases
using.
their parents, and their parents are enablers or, or
Yeah.
users as well. And it's just, people, places, and things we talk about. You have to change everything if you want to change, but it's not that easy. And it isn't about willpower either. It's a disorder. And so we really appreciate, again, all of the wonderful work that you're doing. Let's talk a little bit about collaboration in the courtroom, just quickly. So these courts require not only judges, you mentioned the Veterans Court actually has veteran judges,
Mhm.
judges who were veterans, are veterans. That's awesome. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, and treatment providers. So, you mentioned Henderson as a partner. How does this collaborative process really work? Like in the street, in the field, in practice? How does it work? And what role does the defense play in that team dynamic?
So I know Mr. Pryor was on I don't know, last week, but your last show, and
Yeah,
he's the
last
newly
week.
elected state attorney. So since he took over, there's been some much better collaboration. I actually was able to work with another prosecutor in developing a newer, better felony mental health diversion. The misdemeanor mental health diversion we did was in collaboration with a state attorney because that's where it started. We knew we had and the judges, sorry, we knew we had the three, and then we needed like the money. It's just been a really great experience to have that more collaborative mentality. We have had the same state attorney for like 30 years. And it's hard because, whatever you did 30 years ago, however old you are, I'm sure some of your students aren't 30 yet, but okay, so whatever you did 10 years ago, just think of technology is just obsolete now. So you have to keep up with the times, and you have to make sure that you're adjusting to what will work now in your community. But we've been very lucky. We have peers now in the courtrooms, all of the courtrooms. So these are people with lived experience, and these are funded either through an agency called South Florida Wellness, through the county. Um, they've been amazing because they can have a conversation with clients or families and give them a lot of support and advice and talk to them in a way that I really can't. And it's probably been the biggest change to me in our mental health courts and treatment courts since those started. The public defender's job, so I don't want you to think like we don't litigate and we don't fight. Our job, though, and really lined in the best practices for treatment courts, is to protect the rights of our clients in the treatment milieu. So we may not fight about whether or not the person violated their release, right? We're actually going to counsel them and say, it's actually better if you admit that you relapsed because that's part of recovery is relapse. And it's important that you admit it so that we can, move forward and figure out what the triggers were, et cetera. So that's not what we necessarily fight over, although sometimes we do. We will have more litigation about whether someone qualifies, let's say, for drug court. So we might have to have a hearing about that. If their charge qualifies, if the state attorney thinks that there's some issue of selling. So we will have evidentiary hearings about that, or we'll have evidentiary hearings about whether someone for mental health court is competent to proceed or whether they were not guilty by reason of insanity at the time. So we'll do those things, but it's still within the treatment courts. Um, and we have to walk a line of counseling our clients because ultimately our job is to do what's in their express interest. And sometimes that's tough because what's in their express interest, we are like, this is not in your best interest, but that's not our job because we're really their voice in those courtrooms.
Yes.
And without us, the reason they have these laws, the reason they have Baker Act laws and all this stuff is that someone couldn't just lock you away without any oversight. That a um, husband couldn't lock their wife away and say they were, acting kooky and bizarre and all these things, and they need to be locked away. Trust me, I know. That way there was judicial oversight. So having all these different things in place and these, protections and oversight and checks and balances really make the whole system work. Again, it's not perfect. And I know you said, oh, people say they should trust the system. If you work in this system, I think you see that most of the times it works the way it's supposed to. I think when you see stuff in on TikTok now or on the news is when something happens. Someone didn't do their job, whether it be a public defender that didn't do their job well and someone got convicted that shouldn't have, or whether a police officer didn't do their job well and no one checked on it, and made sure, hey, this other evidence was there. or a state attorney like didn't turn over something, or a judge didn't make a right ruling. Those are the ones you hear about. Most of the time, it works the way it's supposed to work. So,
Great.
but I think we all have our roles, even in a treatment court, and I think we all have to keep with those roles because I do think there's sometimes you're too kumbaya and things can kind of come off the
Uh,
rails in
uh-huh.
different ways.
To kumbaya. That's a good one. So that goes over somebody's head if they don't get it, really.
Yeah. Too
Um,
work, too
yeah,
collaborative. Like you
right,
have to still
exactly.
hold your role, and know what your role is.
Right. And your role, how do you balance that role of legal advocate with the broader goal of helping the clients succeed in rehabilitation? That's sometimes a balancing act, I would
It's
imagine.
really hard because sometimes, like you said before, if they don't want it, if they're not ready, no matter what advice I give them or what warnings the judge gives them or what counseling the treatment provider gives them, they're not ready, and you're probably going to see a relapse.
Yes.
Um, but they have to know that we're there, whether they relapse or not. And that's another important part of treatment court. We're there, even if they messed up. I mean, so many times they'll come back and they're like, I'm sorry, Miss Melinda. I know I didn't want to let you down. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, you didn't let me down.
You're letting
We're here.
yourself
We just got
down.
to work on it again. I
Right.
try not to say you let yourself down. I do try to put like responsibility on them if they're not taking responsibility. I will do that, not in court, but my conversations with them. But I
Yeah.
try not to say you let yourself down. Um,
Tell
I
me
don't know. It
why.
just makes me feel really bad. They did let themselves down more than me, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel bad for them that, they didn't make it and they may have had the best intentions or they may have been doing well for like 6 months and then, something happens and they're just not doing well. So it's a tough struggle to watch. I think that's the hardest part. That and the families, because we also will get calls from the families and we can't share information, but we're certainly going to accept the information and hear about their loved one and the concerns they have. And we have to remind them that, okay, they're in treatment court, but it's voluntary and we're their attorney. So I can't argue for them to stay in jail. Um,
Right.
you can tell whatever you want to the judge, but I can't argue for them to stay in the jail. That's not my job. I'm gonna say I'll say, I'll talk to them about treatment and I'll talk to them about counseling, but if they don't want it, unfortunately, because of lack of resources, we do find people with substance use and mental health disorders spending longer times incarcerated than people with the same charges without mental health or substance use disorders because they're usually
Yes.
waiting for a program.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Okay, final question before we go to the chat and also YouTube. There's a couple of really good statements and questions for you. So looking forward, as someone deeply involved in specialty courts for the last 30 years, you've been part of this as a public defender. Where do you see the future of these programs heading? And what innovations or change do you think could further strengthen their impact on individuals and communities?
so I actually think a very technical kind of thing needs to change. We spend a lot of money on something called competency. And if we spent that same competency restoration, if we spent that same money and use those same resources to actually make someone better, we would go a lot farther.
Mm.
So if someone is not able to understand what's going on, they can be deemed incompetent to proceed. And then we send them to a state hospital or we treat them in the jail or we treat them in the community. And they have to do this class where we spend a lot of money. So maybe we save that. I just want to see revamping. Like maybe we save that whole thing, the whole system for the most serious charges, right? Things where we're like, okay, this is very serious because research shows that if someone is stable, if they're given their medication, they're giving counseling about the importance of taking medication, because you'd be shocked that there's really very little counseling going on about how important it is to take your medicine, right? A lot of times, the most counseling they get is from us, and most of us have very little background, like education-wise, in mental health. So, I just think a shifting of resources would really benefit our community. But I do think we need a commitment from local government, from state government, from federal government to treatment, to actual
Yes.
treatment, to stop saying they're doing it or doing a study or we're going to impanel this grand jury or any of these studies, any of this stuff. Just we know you need a home over someone's head, and it's very expensive to live down here. You need support by way of peers and counseling. And for people who need medication, you need medication and counseling about how important that medication is and why it's important. And to feel
And
comfortable if there's a side effect that you don't like, because it's real, right? If there's a side effect you don't like, there's a lot of medications now. We've come up with plenty of meds.
mhm.
And so there's other things they can do, but sometimes they don't feel comfortable. They just want to stop taking it and they're just not thinking someone's going to hear them. So,
And yeah, and that's also really very, very difficult for people with psychosis. And so if they're not medication compliant, that's definitely going to be another like reentry back into the system,
right.
for sure.
I
Um,
ran numbers on Baker Act, so those hospitalizations, and I did for the past 2 years, people who in Broward County were Baker Acted more than 3 times. And that number is over 500, with the highest person who's been Baker Acted multiple times for a 2-year period was 12 times. It's just not a great system, and I
yeah,
haven't been able to dive into why that happened and what hospitals they were and try to figure out if there's a solution. But if the civil system was working, I guarantee we would have less people that were mentally ill in the jail, and the civil system isn't working. Both Marchman
100%.
and Baker Acts.
Yes, because we also know that a very large majority of the folks who are incarcerated are there for some type of drug related in
Right.
some way. Yeah. So I'm going to go to our PhD students now. I have Dave is up first, then Tom, and then John. So Dave Blair has a question. I've given you mic privileges, Dave. Go ahead.
Hi, I don't know if you remember me from court, but we worked together a couple times.
Hi, how are you?
Um, very good. How are you doing? So like
Good.
I've dealt with some really serious cases, including like first degree murder, premeditated, but they get an NGRI adjudication and they end up with a public defender. I mean, usually they would end up with a public defender anyway, because that's a very serious, expensive charge. How do you separate like your own personal feelings from representing someone with like a serious charge?
I think that's the question that I laugh because that's the question that most new public defenders will get. Like, how could you do this? How could you represent someone? First, I fully believe in the Constitution. If it's not clear that I think that my job is to make sure that all the checks and balances are done. And then when we don't do it, that's when you see bad things happen. Second, I have to be honest, to me, it is easier to represent someone, not necessarily with an NGI, but with a where I know that they've done it and I'm protecting their rights and I'm just making sure that they're getting a sentence that's appropriate with what they actually did, not maybe what they're charged with. Maybe they're charged with too much, right? Um, that's so much easier for me. When I've had people who I know didn't do it, or I very strongly believe that they didn't do it, it's really tough because there's so much on the line, right? If you mess up, a innocent person is going to go to jail for a really long time or prison. And that's a lot to have, to like just absorb and like live with. And so to me, it's a little easier to make sure that like, if someone did something bad, then I'm going to make sure that all their rights are protected. I'm going to make sure I do everything. It doesn't mean that I'm still not going to try to, win the charge, but sometimes my job is to mitigate, to tell their story, to tell maybe like this is an excuse, but this is the reason why we found ourselves in this situation. Like maybe for an NGI client, which we've had, this person was Baker acted numerous times. They were never civilly committed. There is an option to send someone to the hospital long term, and awful things happen, right? And you would have seen it had you just known, like, have you just looked at it, like looking back, you could say, oh, of course, you could see that this would happen. And so knowing that and knowing that this person will, because most NGI clients, from my experience, I have all our NGIs in Broward, um, it's very hard for them to step down out of the hospital. It's not like people think like they're like, oh, and they're done. And then once they do step down from the hospital, they're usually in a program, but they are monitored in Broward. They are monitored by the court until I can prove that they don't need to be monitored, which is a pretty high standard. And I think I've only won one. So, and it wasn't a murder, but
Yeah. Good question, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Tom, I gave you mic privileges. You have a great question. Go ahead. Tom Gainey.
I tried to make this non-confrontational. I had to rewrite it a couple of times, but
so
uh, you mentioned new public defenders are assigned juvenile cases. Is that still the case? And has that changed over time? I feel like the focus on juvenile justice reform in some states anyway has prioritized these cases a different way. As a public defender in specialized courts, Could you please explain that evolution or lack of it? And how do you feel about using juvenile cases as training ground with the potential for stigma that may follow some juveniles through adulthood?
That is such a great question. I spent a lot of time in juvenile and also did like represented kids who were charged as adults. So I agree with you. And I want to make clear that in our juvenile division, we have very senior attorneys, which is something that started a while back. We knew that juveniles, it's just different. It's different dealing with juveniles. You almost have a whole nother client because you hopefully you have their families involved. Um, and so you have all that, and you have educational pieces and developmental issues and just so much. So we have senior attorneys there. It's just that also on some of the more minor cases, the newer attorneys will work with them. Again, usually the misdemeanors, or if it's a more serious case, they'll work with the more senior attorneys. So I can't remember how many years back, I think maybe 15 years back, we made an effort as the Broward County Public Defender's Office to make sure that there was one experienced attorney, at least in each juvenile division. And then the attorney who we have a crossover division, so they handle kids who are both in dependency court, so they're at risk of being in foster care or are in foster care, and they have a criminal charge, so they have one judge, and then that division specifically also has a very experienced attorney. So I agree with you. I think that they need to have someone with experience there.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Good question there. All right, John. John, you're up, and you're the last one in the webinar to ask a question. Go ahead.
All right. What's something about specialty courts that either the public or professionals in the system often misunderstand? And this is kind of secondary to that, but from your perspective, if you have to pick one type of specialty court, which one stands out as being the most understood and why?
The most understood?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm definitely going to answer the first question first because I'm not sure which one I do. So I think that most people think that it's an excuse, or well, one, I think people think people are faking, not maybe with being a veteran or having a substance use disorder, because usually you have a substance case, right? But I think mental health, some people think that people are just acting like this to try to get out of their charge. And then second is that they think people are getting out of their charge. Like even if they take the mental health court route of doing diversion, so you do treatment and felony court for at least a year, a minimum, and then your charge is dismissed, it's still a lot you have to go through. And you're going to court like every 2 weeks in the beginning. And you are evaluated and assessed in regards to your mental health and your treatment, and you're given like a very specified treatment plan for you. So I think that's probably one thing. And the one I think it was that does the best.
Yeah, the one that is the maybe the most misunderstood.
Most misunderstood.
Yeah.
I think mental health court. I think drug court, now people agree that it's more of a disorder. And not that people don't think mental health is a disorder, but I think there's a big stigma that people think mentally ill people are more dangerous than the average public, which has been shown not to be true. And then I think there's people that think people are malingering or faking for maybe serious cases like Mr. Blair said with like NGI on homicides and stuff. And, people who go to the hospital and are faking are pretty quickly found out that they're faking for the most part, because it's a lot to be in there. Having gone there to the different state hospitals and taken phone calls there, it's loud. It's a lot. So I think if you're faking, you'd have to be really, really, really good to stay there for a while.
Okay, great. Good questions. Good questions. Now, one last question, and that's going to be from the YouTube chat. And it's another PhD student of ours, Jamie McCarthy. In your experience, what makes it most difficult to truly meet participants where they are, especially when each person brings such different histories, traumas, and levels of readiness for change?
It's so hard. It's really hard because not only do you have to meet them where they are mentally, sometimes like we as public defenders have to physically meet them where they are. Like we have to go and find them because we've lost them. They were bankrupted and released and we don't know where they went. So I say that not to mean that's misunderstanding your question. I understand what you're saying, but like sometimes we literally have to just find them first. And then just trying to listen as best we can and not get overwhelmed. I think to me that some days I just get so overwhelmed by hearing all their trauma or hearing all of their issues or talking to their families and all they've had to go through before they even came to us. So it's really, it's tough. For people who want to go into counseling and therapy, like, I thank you so much. I am not built for that. I try, but we probably need more tools, and some of the people on my team are much more, are better trained at that than I am. But at how to do better at meeting them where they are, mentally, and where they literally are in their lives.
And that's good for like kind of to close it up, self-care. So self-care for you and self-care for your attorneys is critical, because there's vicarious trauma also, and compassion fatigue. Us first responders, we deal with some of that, but I'm hearing that you're dealing with that as well. So what about self-care?
So I think it's very misunderstood that and prosecutors do, because just even if you're not in a treatment court, right, and you have a lesser concentration, you'll still have clients with mental health, but you just have the facts of cases, you have reviewing photos or videos or any of those things, and that's a lot. So I really want us to get a facility dog at our office for the attorneys, for the legal assistants, for investigators, to go and have a moment where they could quietly be with a dog that, I'm a big dog person.
Yes.
I think that would be wonderful. I don't know how to exactly write the application because, I don't know, like, how I feel like as public defenders, we don't necessarily get the understanding of what we go through from the average person. We're not usually portrayed very nicely in TV shows and movies. So I think that kind of just casts over to like, oh, they're just new attorneys, and they're overworked and underpaid. Got it. But it's a lot. So for me, I'm obsessed with TikTok. I spend a lot of time on TikTok, court cases, cat videos, whatever. I'm obsessed. and I read a lot. I just read not like important things or anything like that. Just dystopian fiction, lots of fun stuff that I don't have to think about work or crime.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us and sharing your insight into this important work. Your perspective reminds us that justice is not only determined or is not about just determining guilt or innocence. It's about the whole person. It's about ensuring fairness and protecting their rights and recognizing the human complexities that often bring these folks into the system. So programs like yours show how collaboration across the justice system can create opportunities for real meaningful change. So thank you for being here again.
Everything you do.
And for our partnership. It really means so much to us. On behalf of the Dean, Dr. Durham, I want to say thank you for your work and taking the busy time out of your schedule to be with us. So thank you again.
You're welcome. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Next week, we're going to continue to explore partnerships and people working every day to strengthen justice in our communities. Next Thursday, join me for Inside the Police Academy, Training Tomorrow's Guardians, with special guest Dean Wayne Bullier from Broward College and Public Safety, and Dr. Chris Powell, one of our adjuncts and one of our alum who graduated from the PhD in Criminal Justice program. So until then, I'm Dr. Grace Telesco. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Good night.